Forward. To give some backstory, my great-great-great, probably another great or two in there, grandmother was an author. She wrote some romance stories and a couple of Australia's first science fiction novels. They didn't sell too well, but she was recognized in her field. Her name was Lena Robertshaw, née Ellis, and, by the only records we've found of her on genealogy sites, she lived in North Sydney from 1876 to her death in 1928. Our family doesn't own that house anymore, but we do have Grandma Lena's box. This is an ancient steamer trunk with some of her old books in it. A pair of very faded epaulets that are too fragile to touch. They're in a sealed sandwich bag. And a funny little wiggly metal thing. I'm a skeptic. I'll put this out here right now. I delved into that box because I'm interested in history. And my own great-great plus grandmother was a fun place to start looking into it. When it comes to weird, I see good reasons for why it's not supernatural. Fake or coincidence is my view. But this one was different. Maybe Grandma Lena was a bit nuts. She had 6 kids, I wouldn't blame her. But I found one story, just a manuscript bound by twine, in the bottom of the box below all the leather-bound books. It was choked with dust, brittle, and had black mold dotting the pages. From what I've been able to tell, this story was never published. On the front page, written, not in old-fashioned cursive, but printed carefully by hand, was the title, The Wanderers of Milladurra. Below that, the date, 1880, and below that, my great-great-plus-grandmother's name and signature. On the next page was this. I write a lot of shit. Air balloons and ghosts and travels to the bottom of the sea. Stuff I'd call derivative twaddle. People lap it up because now it's new. But this story is actually new. It's new, it's fucking bonkers, and it's true. Believe it or not, I don't care. But I wrote it out, and it's the only real shit I've written. This story is dedicated to Jean. I don't know where you are, or how to find you, but I love you too. That intro got my attention. So, being careful with the delicate pieces of paper, I started reading. And, well look, I don't know what to make of it other than to think that maybe I'm not so much of a skeptic anymore. I'll let anyone who's interested figure it out. What I've done is transcribe the story with my voice. I haven't changed it, though I've taken a few guesses about how words are spelled and pronounced where the black mold obliterated them. So here it is for you to decide. The Wanderers of Milladurra, 1880. By Lena Ellis. Part 1. Don't look out. Don't go out. Whatever country I was in, I've always lived in cities. Or, at least in greater city areas. I realized this in the middle of fucking nowhere. In my dinky sedan, a jerry can of extra petrol behind the passenger seat, all on my own, nearly 1,000 kilometers from my home in Sydney. Realized this when I was pretty damn worried about breaking down, far from help, or having taken a wrong turn at the last fork, some 4 hours ago, being nowhere near where I wanted to be. Out here was out far. I'd made it into that massive orange bit in the middle of Australia, where small towns and villages are dotted sparsely in a great flat plain of diminishing scrub on that red dirt, where there were no longer cows, so that just left kangaroos, and stray camels as potential driving hazards. I've got to say though, having rattled out teeth on unsealed roads elsewhere, Australia was in fine form with its rural highways. The asphalt was new, little reflective posts whizzed by on either side of my car, and, a reassuring sight for me, there were emergency telephones popping up at regular intervals, even in a land of no telephone poles. Milladurra is a small town of 528 people. If you're wondering what qualifies as a town out here, it's that. But it has a regional hospital, and it has an ambulance station. It was to the latter I was headed. Milladurra wouldn't be my first choice for a station posting, but you can't leave anyone in the state without ambulance care. Even in parts where the population density is so low, you might be the nearest available ambulance to someone 5 hours away. The small town was reached about an hour later, the trusty one-lane each-way highway taking me straight into Milladurra. It had been 12 hours of drive time, the summer sun starting to set, And it was an exhausted me that pulled up, my knees stiff from being cramped behind the accelerator, at the boarding house on the edge of town. It was an old sandstone home, with rusting corrugated metal for a roof, and the house's overhanging eaves that sheltered the windows from the cooking daytime heat. Piping up beyond the red dust driveway was a carefully tended garden of native plants, a bottle brush, daisies, and succulents. True rustic charm, I thought of it, yanking my bags out of the boot. It'd be a long drive back to see the few friends I had in the city, but things weren't looking so bad. I didn't need to knock on the door. It flung open as I heaved 5 bags with me, glad the heat of the day was starting to dip. "No shit, you're tired," the mid-60s scarecrow of a woman who owned the place placated me. She'd introduced herself as Jean. "From Sydney? In one day?" Her voice roughened by years of cigarettes, she made a sympathetic noise that sounded like polishing a tuba with sandpaper. "Leave Mickey to him," she shooed me with a gesture. The similarly older man went to pick up some of my bags. "You rest," she commanded me, setting off at a spry stride in knock-kneed leggings and a flowery blouse to lead me to my bedroom. "I'll show you, then you'll get some supper." Supper, I've learned, means an after-dinner snack in this part of the world. With tired apathy, I watched the portly Mickey attempt to collect 3 of my bags, wondering whether to intervene with a word about how my day job involved pulling people downstairs. I decided against it. Following after Jean, leaving old-fashioned values about assisting guests to make me feel welcome. "We're packed just now," Jean told me, showing me into my room. "Sorry for no windows. We've got only the 3 rooms for guests and another of your ambos will get the last one. No windows there either." She shrugged. "Old one-story house," she explained. "Some rooms just got no windows." It wasn't a big deal for me. I'd largely be crashing here around 12-plus-hour shifts and went on call overnight. I also fully planned to leave the moment a metro posting opened up for me closer to the city. Windows or no windows, it wouldn't be for long. "And one thing I gotta tell you," Jean went on, standing in my doorway as Mickey dumped my bags on the worn rug. "Don't go out after midnight." Her pale-eyed stare, previously clever and efficient, had grown sharper. "Midnight to 1 in the morning, especially," she went on, eyeing me closely. "You're a city girl. You got funnel webs and what's it's there, but here you got crocs and snakes. We're on the river. There's no one to hear you scream if the crocs get you at midnight." She left me at that, shutting the door, and she left me unconvinced. I was pretty sure snakes and crocodiles, as reptiles, didn't go sunning themselves in the open at midnight, and I may not be an Aussie born and bred, but I do know that the river this far inland, often badly impacted by drought, didn't have crocodiles. Frankly, I was more scared of funnel web spiders. I'd previously found one inside my jacket sleeve. After I'd put my arm into it. And what was I gonna do? Ignore an emergency call at midnight? Just tell a dying person to hang on for an hour? For a woman who provided a home away from home to numerous paramedics, Jean seemed pretty out of touch with what on-call overnight meant. "Emergencies happen at all times, unfortunately," I said, diplomatically when Jean reminded me of her warning over supper. She made a mean bacon sandwich. I was wiping grease off my face as I went on. I'd love to ignore calls overnight, but I've had no success with that before. Jean stood with her arms crossed by the stove, watching me with evaluating eyes, her mouth pulled into a scrunched, disapproving line of wrinkled lips. "People around here aren't gonna call you at midnight," Mickey, rather than Jean, said. Slouched in his seat, he set down his beer on the table and turned a serious look on me. "They know better. No need," he went on, staring at me. "Be a tough lady out here. Keep yourself safe." The couple could know and think of me whatever they liked, I thought. Didn't stop shit from hitting the fan at 0-100 hours. I didn't argue it, however. Whatever the couple thought, I didn't choose my hours. And Mickey's casual sexism just made me want to roll my eyes. Didn't end up mattering much anyway. The city pace of the ambulance service was like a constant blind sprint. Anyone lower down the priority ranking an afterthought as we rushed to handle all the bigger things on no breaks and overtime hours. The country pace, however, I've never slept more since I joined the service, even while being on call overnight. There are far fewer country people that will call because of a sprained ankle. There's a certain subset of them who won't call even after the farm machinery lops the arm off. Instead, they'll pick up their arm, pop it on the passenger seat, and drive themselves to the hospital, one-armed and bleeding. It's not my recommendation, but after a year of sleep deprivation, I wasn't complaining. It took me only 4 shifts to settle into a royal laze. I even started bringing my laptop to the ambulance station to play games on it during my shifts. Here and there, my work partner and I would bolt out to handle something big, and that could take ages if the patient was far away. But the rest of the time, I luxuriated in amazing free time. And sleep. It's like a complete lulling of my brain into Dust Bowl hot comfort and staid languor. After a month, I had yet to see a croc or a snake. But that wasn't to say Aussie wildlife wasn't bamboozling. The fuck is that? My partner, a grouch in his 40s, was washing the ambulance at the front of the station. I'd done the stock check, so I was sitting in the shade on a less dusty patch of grass, munching on one of Jane's sandwiches, as I observed a muddy bundle of sticks on the ground next to me. My partner Rob didn't look over. "What?" he asked. I pulled a face at the thing on the ground. I could swear the muddy stick bundle was moving. Sticking my sandwich back in its bag, I leant down and looked closer. Yeah, there was a clump of mud and sticks on the ground next to me, and it was wriggling. "That," I said, pointing. Rob did come over to see, a miracle considering the sour man appeared to have no interest in anything at all. His graying hair close-cropped and one stud earring in, he leant down to see what I was pointing at. "A bagworm," he told me and stomped off. Right, I thought, going back to my sandwich. I had no better understanding of a bagworm than I'd have of the quacking ground-dwelling bee I'd found a week before. Neither of the 2 ambos I'd so far worked with here would be a good person to talk about it with, though. I had developed the opinion that the paramedics of Milladurra Station were grumpy, humorless, uncaringly efficient sacks of drear. That was one con of working here. It seemed to be a great dearth of lightheartedness. It was that night that we got our first on-call job of the month. Snoring away in my single iron-frame bed, I woke with a start to the sound of my phone jangling its cheery tune. "Lena," the dispatcher on the other end said, "you've got a suspected stroke at..." Without densely packed suburbs, dispatchers tend to lack a good way to finish that sentence. "Cobb campsite," the dispatcher finished, somewhat lamely, and I had no idea where that was. I thanked the dispatcher and scrambled out of bed in my uniform. I was stuffing my feet into my boots when my phone rang. It was Rob. "Yeah?" I answered. "Give it a moment." The phone pinned by my shoulder to my ear, I yanked up my boot zipper. "What?" "Use the toilet, I have a bite to eat," Rob said impatiently. "We'll go in 5. I frowned, my fingers on the second boot zipper. Rob would have gotten the same call I had. I expected him to be ready for me to pick him up. Stroke in Cobb campsite, lights and sirens. I wasn't a go in 5 and have a piss first job. "It might be a bullshit job, Rob," I said, not ready to believe him a lazy, in addition to grumpy, sack of drear. "But I don't know that until I get there." There was silence on the other end of the line. Astounded, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall by the light of the bedside lamp. "I can go alone if you don't want to," I offered, though it was a testy suggestion. Frankly, if you're that sick of the job, get out. Don't hang on and leave people to suffer. "Give it 5, Lena," Rob shot back. "Get rugged up, it's chilly overnight. Go to the loo, don't look out the windows." And then he hung up. I stared at my phone, pulled away from my ear. It blinked the time at me. Time that was ticking by. If this patient needed clot retrieval, they'd have to be flown to a big hospital for it. Time was brain cells. In a stroke you had barely several hours. The clock on my phone ticked over to 0:57. I went to grab my ambulance keys from the side table. Instead of keys, I got a coaster. I looked over. No keys. I could have sworn I'd left them right next to my phone. I yanked open my top drawer. Nothing there either. I probably left them in the kitchen then. Dumped them as soon as I came home to the offer of dinner. Clipping my radio into place, I got up. The corridor outside my room was dark, only my lamp trickling diminishing light into it as the door eased back to closed. The kitchen wasn't any better. All the blinds were down, blocking any porch or sparse street lamp light outside from illuminating the room. I fumbled around for the light switch, finally found it near the front door and went looking for keys. Not on the table, nor on any of the cluttered and outdated countertops. On the rack by the door there was only one set of keys, Jean and Mickey's, I figured, as they were keys to a Holden, not an ambulance Mercedes. Increasingly frantic, I searched farther, darting back to my room to make sure I hadn't been an idiot and missed them, then into the bathroom to see if I dropped them, then there... Hey! I startled, coming out of the bathroom to see Mickey dressed in a white undershirt and boxers, in the corridor. He was leaned against the wall, as though groggy from just being woken, his head tipped to rest on it just behind a photograph of a young Jean holding a baby beside a mustachioed man. "Heard you scurrying about," Mickey said. He held out a set of keys dangling from his fingertips by the carabiner. "Think I grabbed these by mistake. Thought they were mine." He stared at him a second longer. There was no way he'd have mistaken ambulance keys for his own. His keys didn't consist of only one car key, one station key, and a carabiner. But I didn't have time to question him. I grabbed the keys with a nod to him and left out the kitchen door. The job ended up taking hours and involved helicopter retrieval, because despite the distances and dallying, the semi-lucky patient was still within a window where he'd benefit from it. I'd fanged it on pitch-dark country roads despite kangaroo hazards, just to make up lost time. Rob had been ready and waiting outside his house for me when I swung by to pick him up, but that didn't make me fume any less. I waited until we were back at the station before calling him up on it. "You might not think 5 minutes matters," I said very pointedly, "but I do. It takes ages for a stroke patient out there to get definitive care. I get that, but every minute still matters." To be clear, Rob knows his shit. I wasn't telling him anything he didn't know. He wasn't paying attention to me, though. He was restocking the cannulation drawer, his face hard and still. "I don't appreciate being told to take a piss before going to a job," I went on, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm not arguing with you." Rob had looked up. He hadn't yelled, but he was glowering at me and his tone was aggressive. "You've got fuck all experience out here," he went on, staring me down. "You've been in the job, what, a year? Sure, you know the book, but you don't know everything. Berate me all you want, but you're the fuckwit here. Don't leave the house before 1. Used to being put in my place as a trainee had made me steam, but it shut me up. I told myself after it was because I knew I wouldn't get anywhere arguing with him. If it happened again, I decided I'd take the issue up with the manager. I was one of those people who could flare up and cool down quickly. Anger-free later, and actually seeming concerned, he checked with me that I hadn't left before 1. Still steaming, I gave him a curt answer that I hit the respond button inside the ambulance at 1:02 in the morning. I wasn't happy about it. We didn't get another midnight job the next night, but for once I didn't sleep soundly in my wrought-iron bed. I lay awake, still angry about a hierarchy of experience and all the times I've been put down as young upstart. Angry and contemplating the shit deal that was healthcare in the country. In the city, you could be at a stroke hospital, or at a major trauma center or burns unit in half an hour. Here you were playing with luck as time ran away from you. I rolled over and glared at my ceiling. I never thought about it before, but I thought about it then. My room, though nice and quaint, was like a sandstone cell. Now I wanted a window. That brought me back to wondering about this midnight to 1 business. I'd nearly forgotten about Jean's warning a month before. Haven't put it down to a quirk of Jean's and Mickey's. I was surprised to find Rob too seemed to believe in it. I thought Mickey was being creepy, stealing my keys and startling me in the corridor the previous night. He hadn't otherwise been creepy, to be fair. The beer gut and pajamas I mightn't think appropriate to wear around guests of your boarding house. He could look like the Laren sword. That was me assigning him a stereotype. He and Jane seemed to get along with a casual sort of camaraderie and affection. I didn't think they were married, but they'd obviously been together a long time, and were happy that way. So, if Mickey wasn't being creepy, had he purposely nicked the keys to prevent me from going out before 1? It was probable, and that just made me angrier. And, another thing, despite what Jean had said to me on the day I got here about the place being full, I was pretty sure I was their only guest. That or the other bloke never left their room, because I hadn't seen any other person here. I didn't get more time to contemplate it. My ears had picked up a sound, and, disconcerted, they tuned in. It was like a hoarse sound, repeating over and over again. It was getting louder, and it didn't stop. Confused and listening hard, I slipped out from under the covers and sat on the side of the bed. It sounded like an animal. I could tell anyone about hearing possums in the middle of the night as a new Australian. First time I'd heard them, me the only one awake in the silent house, my eyes had gone wide, and I scuttled over to the window, peering out into the blackness. Half expected some huge Paleolithic cat, somehow still extinct, to be prowling down the street growling out its death knell. That's what possums sound like in the dead of the night. Fearsome otherworldly creatures, snarling out a warning. If you want sound effects for a supernatural horror film, look into the midnight noises of a brush-tailed possum. But this didn't sound like a possum. Not quite, and as it got louder, the difference became clearer. Its noise sounded deeper, more menacing, as though belonging to a bigger animal. And it was loud. Considering I was in a sandstone cell, and the noise seemed distant, it must be very loud. With no window to peek out of, I got out of bed and slipped from my room, my ears pricked and goosebumps spreading up my arms. Not wanting to alert Mickey to my being up, I tiptoed down the corridor headed for the kitchen. "Hi, Lena." I stopped dead in my tracks. My eyes used to the dark, I could see Jean's skinny form sitting on the kitchen table. She got up, moving without incident in the dark, and switched on only the light in the range hood over the stove. There was a steaming cup of tea on the table where Jean had been sitting. "Want some tea?" she asked, quite pleasantly. I was already on the edge from the continued growling of the thing outside. It was louder in the kitchen, a constant refrain of going on outside the windows, sounding like some evil demon. Jean, sitting in a dark kitchen as though waiting for me, was more to be unsettled about. I thought of outsiders being fattened up to be used as sacrifices in weird small towns, miles away from any other town. Though maybe that was mostly because I'd gained 2 kilos eating Jean's food. But Jean didn't fit the TV horror stereotype. Though in her 60s, she wasn't plump and endlessly over-friendly. She swore like a sailor and smoked like a chimney, and she was standing across from me in track pants and an oversized t-shirt. I added. Jean did know I didn't like tea. I wasn't sure why she was offering. "No thanks." Jean took it with a nod. She went back to her seat in her own cuppa, looking at ease. I bit the bullet. "Do you know what that is?" I asked, indicating the covered window and whatever was out there in the endless outback. "Some kind of possum?" Jean looked up to me. Her clever pale eyes were considering and her thin lips drawn into a scrunched line. She seemed to think about it, then gave a small nod. "Fuck knows," she said, surprising me. I had thought she'd tell me it was just a possum. People describe different things, but there's different noises and no good way to know which is making what. "Is it?" The ongoing growls really sounded demonic. "It's loud." I tried again. "Why you don't want me going out at midnight? Because of some creature?" Jane eyed me shrewdly, taking a sip of her tea. She said noncommittally. "That's why there's no dogs in this town." That brought me up short. I hadn't really paid attention, but now I thought of it. I hadn't heard a dog bark once in Milladurra, nor seen one, hazardous to an ambo or friendly. It was strange for any part of Australia that wasn't a city centre, and stranger still in a small town. Dogs, I had thought, were ubiquitous out here. They, I guessed, get killed if you forget to bring them in, Jane said, and then it's not a working dog if you let it sleep on the couch every night. Jean and I must have different ideas about dogs, but I wasn't interested in a debate. "Come, love," Jean said, pulling out the chair beside her. "Sit down." I hesitated, glancing over at one of the windows. Its blind, like all the rest, like every night, was pulled down to cover it entirely. I'd come to the kitchen to peek out, to search for some massive demon beast in the darkness. Rather than move into the house, now the creature's snarls were getting quieter. "Nah!" Jean barked, slapping the seat of one of the chairs she pulled out. "Don't you look out. You never look out. Sit your ass down here and take my word for it for once." It was her house. I still hesitated, though I no longer thought Jean was trying to fatten me up for ritual slaughter. "You said there were descriptions of it," I said. "Someone's looked out, and they played with fire," Jean said harshly. "I'm not being a bitch, girl. I'm telling you as it is." She wasn't really. All she told me is that there were animals out here even weirder than the Aussie normal. She hadn't told me why I couldn't look out the windows. I gave in, though, and sat down in the preferred chair. Jane sipped her tea. "We've got one of your ambo mates arriving tomorrow," she went on, as though we'd always been having a light discussion. "New guy. Doesn't want to rent a place here. Got a girlfriend back in Sydney." I nodded slowly, still trying to hear the retreating sounds of the beast. "Good choice," Jean said, satisfied, her cup cradled between her hands. "You and this Michael bloke. Don't sit down roots here. This town's a shit place to raise a family." I blinked. The kitchen seemed homier now that I couldn't hear the ground so well. I glanced toward the corridor wall where the picture of Jean with some man and a baby hung. It wasn't there. Surprised, I blinked and looked again. There were photos of a young boy on a bike, a toddler playing in the beach somewhere with Jean, but no picture of the young family. And as I looked, no picture at all of the mustachioed man who'd been, presumably, the boy's father. Presumably the photo I'd seen was just further along the corridor than I'd thought, and I couldn't see it from here. "You had a son?" asked Jean, looking back to her. Jean was swallowing her last sip. She nodded. "One boy," she said. "Ages ago now." "How is he?" "Living his life," Jean said easily. "He's a good kid." I nodded, not about to push it. The man with the mustache wasn't Mickey. He had similar coloring to Mickey, but that was about where the resemblance stopped. I had wondered when the mustachioed man had left the picture and Mickey had entered it. I was gonna ask, though. I got the sense Jean didn't want to share her life story with a guest. I did check the corridor's walls once I'd said goodnight to Jean. The growl had disappeared from the night. The photo of the young family wasn't there. In its place was a picture of Mickey and Jean at Uluru, the two standing, beaming at the camera, with the massive red rock behind them.